Good day traders, welcome to a new week and another RMD technical market overview. December has started off with a bang and we have seen markets continue to rally across the board. But the question is whether they are running out of steam. We'll have a closer look at this in this week's video. I'm going to let this timer roll and I will see you back in the charts. We start our analysis this week by looking at the US dollar to South African rand. At the start of last week, we saw a brief rally taking us to our initial target and our area of resistance, and this was at the weekly R1 near the $15.43 level, after which price then retreated back to the previous lows. And as we can see that the new lows has actually been just above the previous lows, meaning there is a chance that we are now in the process of forming what could be a bottom. This is still an area of support, so to be wise just to keep an eye out for a break lower, which could potentially see price move into this area of support at 1488. However, if price can recover and find its footing above the weekly pivot and also above this overhead diagonal, and that would mean price would need to get back above 1541. That is where we have our weekly R1 pivot. That could then see price move into this area of 1565, where it will meet resistance from the monthly pivot and also the 4-hour 200 SMA. We are moving on now to the Euro USD. Last week saw price reach and also succeed our second bullish target and now appears to be losing some momentum. We could see that should price pull back from this area, it's possible that we will see price move into the area of the new weekly pivot at 1.207. It could also pull back deeper into this area of support between last week's R1 at 1.201 and the pivot. And of course, should price pull back even deeper, that could see price retest this area of the 4-hour 100 SMA, which it could possibly meet in this area of support between the yearly R2 at 1.191 and the weekly S1 pivot at 1.197. Of course, should we see any bullish price action or price continuation from any of these areas, we would look out first for price to take out last week's high, and that could potentially then see a new bullish target in the area between our weekly R1 pivot and our monthly R2 pivot, and that would be in the vicinity of 1.222. Having a brief look now at our economic calendar for the week ahead. As we can see, we have quite a quiet week ahead of us with just a few medium to high impact events on Thursday as well as on Friday. And you can see these are the events listed over here with some standard CPI figures as well as unemployment claims on Thursday and core PPI and PPI figures on Friday. Moving on now to the GBPUSD. So although we did not have a significant pullback last week, we only had a slight pullback closer towards this 4-hour 100 SMA, after which price then resumed to make a new high. It does appear at this stage that price is losing some momentum, and for this reason I would consider the area of support to be quite narrow, and that should be the area between 1.339 and 1.342, and that is our weekly pivot. We can also see that we have this lower diagonal support, and all of these is then coming together in this area, as well as this 4-hour 50 SMA. So a close below this would potentially be quite bearish, and we could see a sell-off or a retest of support at least towards this weekly S1 at 1.329, but also quite likely a deeper pullback towards the monthly pivot at 1.319, where it could also meet up with this 4-hour 200 SMA. If price were to see some bullish price action and manage to stay above this important support level at 1.339, we can see this is an area of previous resistance, and that means that in a continuation of price continuation, this area should now hold as a support. That could then see price retest the highs from last week near our monthly R1 at 1.352, and perhaps even that weekly R1 pivot at 1.355. And then should it take out those highs, it could see a high as the weekly R2 pivot at 1.367. We are moving on now to the Australian dollar USD. Like we saw with the previous USD pairs, price has not seen much of a pullback. Instead, price has pushed slightly higher, reaching our target area at last week's R1 pivot, and that was at 0.742. So support would be once again quite close to where we are currently trading, and that would be in the area of 0.740. This is also our weekly pivot and also a previous area of resistance from last week. If price were to break below this, I'm quite certain that we will likely then see a retest of support at the lower diagonal, and that is also multiple diagonals. The magenta line also here from a higher time frame, as well as our 4-hour 100 SMA, all coming together on this area of support at 0.7342. So this would then, of course, be an important area of support. And if price manages to hold this area, it will probably make another attempt at the weekly pivot. And then, as we can see, if this were to be a top, we can perhaps expect something like a head and shoulders forming, and that could then potentially then see a sell-off lower towards the area of support between our weekly S2 pivot at 0.729 and this monthly pivot at 0.724, which is also where it will meet up with the 4-hour 200 SMA, which will give it some additional support. So just be careful around this area. As I've mentioned, it does appear to be losing some momentum, and a pullback would not be unlikely. However, in a bullish scenario, if price were to recover and stay above any of these two areas and take out the highs, then price could perhaps see another leg higher towards maybe this area at 0.750 or 0.751, which is the area between the monthly R1 pivot and the weekly R2 pivot. Referring back to our analysis from last week, we mentioned that should price just continue to trend higher, it will most likely head towards this highs from November, and that was exactly what we saw happening. So it took out those highs and then continued to trade slightly higher. At this stage, I would consider support the area between the highs from November and the weekly S1 pivot at 12,226. This is also a lower diagonal support, as well as where we have our 4-hour 100 SMA. So this would be an area of support in the event of a pullback. If price would then continue and see some bullish price action from this area, we could perhaps have another test of the upper diagonal and perhaps as high as the weekly R1 pivot at 12,674. There's also the opportunity, of course, that should price outperform, we could have a go at this weekly R2 pivot, also the weekly monthly R1 at 12,850. Then in a bullish or more bearish scenario, should price break deeper into this area of support, this is the red area I've highlighted here, we could find some support at 12,050. This was also a previous area of resistance, meaning it should theoretically now turn into support. And then there's also a very strong area of support near the monthly pivot at 11,904, which is also where we will find a 4-hour 200 SMA. We are looking now at UK oil or UK Brent crude oil. Last week saw price continue to trend higher, just barely tagging that weekly R1 pivot, that which was our initial bullish target. At this stage, we're seeing price continuing to trend within this bullish channel. Support remains the lower diagonal, and just considering where the lower diagonal will meet with our weekly pivot at 48.58, that would be an area for a retest. Of course, should that hold, we can then expect price to start moving higher towards the weekly R1 pivot at 50.32, and considering a possible second bullish target, that would then be this area between the weekly R2 pivot, which is also the monthly R2 pivot, and this is our weekly R2 pivot, which was also the weekly R2 pivot last week, and our monthly R1 at 52.54, and also the overhead resistance from our diagonal. So that would be an area for a bullish target. Of course, should price break or close below this lower diagonal, that could see price then sell off towards this area of support, and I'm just going to extend it over here, and that would be the area where we'll likely see price move into this area closer to 46.50, where it will meet up with the 4-hour 100 SMA, which will also offer some additional support. However, should we see price then break below that, it's possible that we will see a retest of the 4-hour 200 SMA, and that could happen perhaps lower towards the monthly pivot at 44.18. We are looking now at gold. Gold last week saw price move into this area of support at 1,765. This is the area of support we mentioned on the video also last week, and as you can perhaps recall, we also mentioned that it's quite possible for gold to perhaps then start staging a recovery from this area, and that is indeed what we saw happening, with price then moving back into that 1,850 level, which we mentioned to be the pullback area, or at least the initial recovery area. And we also have our 200 daily SMA plotted over here, which I've mentioned should also be the first step in this recovery. So although we've now formed what seems to be the small inverted head and shoulders with a target near the weekly R1 pivot at 1,869, so that would be the target of this inverted head and shoulders. And also we can see this is where it will meet up with the 4-hour 200 SMA and some other additional areas of resistance as well. I also think it could be likely that price will come back to retest this area between our weekly pivot at 1,817 and the daily 200 moving average, which I've plotted on the chart over here. So it's possible the price will probably come down, retest this area, and then if the recovery is to be continued, we'll see price move back higher towards this full inverted head and shoulders target at 1,869. We are concluding this week's technical market overview by looking at Bitcoin. As always, we are looking at Bitcoin from the weekly time frame, and for this week, not much has changed. We can see that Bitcoin challenged the previous all-time high, now pushing that higher towards 19,918, just shy of that 20,000 level. Support remains at 16,500, or at least the area between 16,500 and 17,000. So in a scenario of a pullback, I'd say that would be the area to consider, and just keep a fine eye out for either price continuation or perhaps a deeper pullback. And as mentioned previously, we saw a pullback as deep as 13,900 after we reached that all-time high in 2017. So just keep an eye out for that and be aware of the possibility of something like this happening. Of course, should we see price continue to move higher, trend higher, if price were to take out the all-time high, I think the first stop would of course be that 20,000 level, and after that we could probably expect price to move into this area north of 20,600 and as high as 21,200, which is last month's R4 pivot. I once again hope you enjoyed this week's video. Please remember to give us a thumbs up. Also, for those viewers who haven't yet subscribed, we would love to have you on board. As I've mentioned on last week's video also, if you are interested in learning more about technical analysis or just about trading in general, please consider signing up on our website, after which you will get free access to our very comprehensive masterclass training series. Until next time, this is John Jacobs for RMDTRADER. Trade smart and trade successful.